good idea, bad startup. Bad idea, good startup. So I think, dive into this, but I think we're going to play into my thesis around, what it takes or what it means to actually build good companies. It's completely non-intuitive, right? That's in summary of what I'll be talking about for the next hour. There's very few ways to actually tell whether an idea is a good one until you actually talk to people about it. So again, I want to kind of help you guys get excited about how to actually validate startup ideas in the wild, actually build products that people like. So again, kind of in the next course of time, what I'll be talking about is quick introduction, talk a little bit, not much about myself, but focus on, again, the anatomy of a pivot, very real experience that myself and 3 other co-founders, all UCLA grads, all kind of went through from getting from where we were when we started to now a very well-backed 25-person company that will be 50 people by the end of the year. Kind of talk through what we've identified as maybe 5 common failure cases for startups and why most companies don't actually make it. So that how do you be that 1 out of 50 that actually succeeds past your first year to 18 months? Then how do you actually validate your idea in the market? I think this is really relevant to a lot of kind of what you guys are working on in some of your classwork here. Hopefully something that can add some value as well. And then again, what does it actually feel like, or how do you know when you found product market fit? And then of course, kind of some open resources of things that I have found most valuable along my journey, but really just open it up to questions. I think that might be where, if I set the record straight, won't be some of the most interesting conversation. Okay. And also, I'm kind of market validating this presentation in my own right. So like, if there's parts of what I say or slides or things that are actually more interesting than others, so I'd love if you guys tweeted it, because that will be a way that I actually take as like a signal that, oh wow, that was a good point that I should go write or talk more about. So I feel fortunate now to be in a position where I actually get to do talks like this. So I won't feel weirded out if you guys pull your phones and tweet something. So please indulge me. So again, as I kind of talked about, but kind of a thesis that, and this is not common to me, this is very widely, kind of becoming more widely held, especially in Silicon Valley, that startup ideas that sound like good ideas are actually probably really bad ideas, right? Because if you have an idea that sounds like a really good idea, there's probably a really good reason that it's either not being done, or there's already 10 other companies that are thinking about it. So really the best ideas are the ones that are non-obvious and that cater to a really small first market where you can actually start to build a lot of traction, right? So, 4 very common examples of this, Airbnb. Everyone thought Airbnb was a really bad idea when it first started. It's like, why would I want to sleep on a stranger's couch, right? Because that's kind of how Airbnb started. It was a couch surfing kind of network, right? And of course, Airbnb today, we're the newest billion-dollar companies. Uber, same thing. Why the heck would I want to, get in the back of somebody's car that I don't know and actually take a ride somewhere? So again, small idea to start with that got huge very fast. Instacart. There's already been 5 or 6 other companies that have lost billions and billions of dollars of investors' money trying to deliver groceries. Why is now the time to actually make this work? Of course, mobile devices completely changed the game. And of course, Google. Google was the 30th search engine, right? It wasn't a new idea. It was something that everybody said was a horrible idea. In fact, even in the beginning, Larry and Sergey thought Google wasn't a very good idea, and would have been really excited to sell it for a couple $1 million to Yahoo, which certainly worked out well for now the 50,000 people that work at Google. But kind of before I progress any further, I think startups are a very polarizing thing. And it's something I think is really important for everybody who's even potentially thinking about either starting your own company or actually going to do your own company actually understands. Because it's the best thing and the worst thing that's ever happened to me, right? And not just to me, but the people that are closest to me in my life. And that's again, the things that people are, talking about how awesome startups are. They talk about being your own boss, this vertical learning curve, the high risk, high reward nature, of course, and it's something that's kind of cool now, right? But really the things that they don't talk about as often, the fact that it's almost impossibly difficult in that every day my job, and certainly all of my peers' jobs, is just to punch through brick walls, right? There's never a day that's easy, and I promise the day that comes is when you get that one call that you wish you would never get. Certainly there's no balance, right? I mean, my work-life balance is how much time I sleep is the time that I don't work. It sounds silly, but it's true, right? It's very, very hard to give everything that you need to get something off the ground and to fight the inertia of the fact that the world doesn't need another startup to actually, right? To actually, make this work. So I think it's very, very highly likely to fail, right? There's truly 98% failure rate for startups, which means 1 out of 50 will actually succeed. I feel fortunate in the fact that I've been able to surround myself with a lot of those peers or people that are more successful than others. But even in that group, like the relative order of success is very, very disparate, where if the only reason you're trying to do a startup is to make money, you'd be much better spending your time doing something else. Of course, frankly, lose friends, right? Like, I have been in a black hole for the last 2 years, and it's only been recently that I've actually been able to go out, evangelize, talk to not only customers, but friends, peers, people who are excited about startups, to actually get them involved, right? This is something that takes up everything. And I will say, after having gone through it, it's been completely worth it, because the things that I've coming out of it are things that I would never experience. And the fact that I'm even standing in front of a classroom of like 85 people at my alma mater, I think to me proves the point that this was a good decision. But no one told me it was a good decision when it started. In fact, every person, when I said I'm leaving Google to go start my own company, thought I was an idiot, right? So again, I just want to kind of like lay this out, that as much as you hear about what's glorifying startups or what makes startups awesome or not awesome, always kind of take it with a grain of salt, because there's always two sides to any story. So again, kind of my logo slide, right? So as I talked about, went to UCLA, I graduated in 2010. I studied architecture, minored in accounting, which is kind of how for me, I wanted to really understand the balance of both the creative side of my mind and how that works and how you build things at multiple levels of abstraction. So in architecture, you think about how do you build the building and think about it at its largest sense, but also like where every pillar goes to actually make it stand up. So that was really helpful for me to then understand and balance with the more accounting or more foundational business side of my mind, which is, okay, how do dollars run through how does cash flow come in and actually income run through a balance sheet, right? Things that now matter much more, that you're on that like other side of product market fit, but that even so helped me actually get my first role in the tech industry, which was at Yahoo. So when I was at UCLA, between my junior and my senior years, I interned on the search team at Yahoo, where I could kind of help them figure out how much money will we make every year based on search. It's kind of a funny question now, because Yahoo doesn't actually do search anymore. But something at the time was really interesting, because it exposed this really interesting combination of the skills that I learned in the kind of finance or accounting side of my classwork, but also then combined with something that was very interesting to me just intrinsically, which was, how do massive corporations actually make money? So again, for me, this kind of working as a financial analyst in a tech industry was my first exposure to what life was like inside of a large, massive company. After being at Yahoo for about 6 months after graduation, it was my ticket to get up into the Bay Area, which is where I knew I wanted to kind of have my career, given that it's like truly is even today like the center of the tech ecosystem. From that, I had the chance to move over to Google to actually help launch Google Offers and Google Wallet, which were two of their first commerce products. So it was an interesting challenge. Then, to Professor's point, really understanding how do the analytics of a business actually drive customer value. So a lot of what I was focused on there was thinking about, what are the things that customers are most interested in? What are the deals that they like and that they don't like? How do you get all of these nascent signals from things like social media, from customer support emails, from people calling in, and then actually use that to figure out how to make our product better? But also then, how do you very cheaply test ideas without having to go, build out a 30-person sales team to sell into a new vertical, right? It's a really interesting mix of then taking that same finance background that I had built from UCLA, but also from working at Yahoo, and then kind of combining that with more generic analytics or business intelligence. After being at Google for 2 years, I kind of realized that, one of my mentors told me, taking a step back, the reason I wanted to move into Silicon Valley to start with was because I knew that my longer term goal was to start my own business. Both my parents were entrepreneurs, something that I grew up around and I just believed was what my calling card was in life. And I knew that if I wanted to be a technology entrepreneur, the best place for me to do that would be to start in Silicon Valley. So after being at Google for 2 years and having a very specific conversations with one of my mentors, I was like, hey, do I go to business school to kind of further my education and continue to, understand what it's like to work at a startup, or do I just go kind of do the damn thing? And kind of what they told me is, there's the only thing that will ever prepare you for starting your own company is starting your own company. So that's kind of what I went and did. I recruited three of my other friends from UCLA, so all 4 are Bruin founders, and we kind of threw like 10 different ideas against the wall, which we can talk about that if you guys have questions, how that early process went in the Q&A period. And then actually kind of end up coming up with 1 or 2 that we thought were really worth pursuing. So we'll talk about when we get to the anatomy of the pivot what that first idea was. Ended up actually being the completely wrong idea to start with. In figured that out fast enough that we came on to something called deep linking, which is now like completely redefining an industry that we're in the middle of. And with that, we had the chance to actually get into Y Combinator, which was one of the largest, most prominent startup incubators in Silicon Valley, which then gave us access to a lot of the resources, the funding, the financing to be where we are today, which, having raised $15 million, 25-person team, 14 engineers, predominantly machine learning and data science, really focused on actually helping apps intelligently link to each other so that you don't have that stupid experience of clicking on something that kicks you out to the mobile web when you already have that app installed on your phone. We can talk about what we do a little bit more at the end, if that's something to be interesting. But then really for me, the key bringing things full circle, and actually then finally when my friends said, oh wow, John, that was actually a good idea, was when Google Ventures actually led our seed and our Series A rounds. So actually then going from Google to having Google Ventures invest was kind of like the startup seal, where then suddenly all of my Google friends were kind of coming to me and asking for jobs, right? So not until that point, which was a year plus later, did people actually think that me leaving my current job was a good idea. So again, these cycles oftentimes take a long time to actually get validation, but I think in the early phases, if you do it right, you can actually learn really, really fast what's a good idea and what's not. So again, quickly on kind of what the introduction piece before getting into the meat here, right? So a couple more things that people just don't tell you about startups. It's not just about hard work and the fact that work 12, 15, 18 hours a day, but it's the emotionally difficult parts that really define the people that succeed and those that don't. Right? It's really hard to be working as a solo founder, a 2-person team, a 5-person team. You're doing the same thing for so long. It's just not something you really realize how hard it is until you actually do it and are sitting in a basement with no windows and eating ramen for 3 to 4 months at a time, right? Which is kind of how we started, as well as most other companies that were in that space. Again, as I said, it's almost never a good idea. Because if you're going to try to put any equation to the expected value of a startup over time compared to the opportunity costs of any other direction, the math is just never going to work. Which means that if you're going to do it, shouldn't be the reason, right? You do it for the experience and because you believe so deeply in the idea that you're working on, but there's just nothing else that you could possibly do. Again, to that same point, there's no safety net, right? I think the safety is the nicest thing about working on side projects, which is how I started and was working with my coworkers, or my current now coworkers, was that we would work on an idea, we would get it to a point where it'd be in market, it'd get some traction, but then would stop working for whatever reason. And when it would stop working, we could say, okay, that's cool, but we're done with that, let's go figure out something else to do, right? We could just go back to our current jobs, take a break, take a breather, and figure something else out. But when you're working full time on your own company, there is no other alternative, right? If you're not making something work, you're ultimately going to either go back to work for your old job or have to figure something else out. Again, startup inertia is the most important concept that I can kind of there's one thing you guys remember, startup inertia, right? The world doesn't need another startup, right? In order for it to exist, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, there has to be a very, very, very compelling reason for it, right? It has to be something that is 10 times better than anything else that's out there, or something that is 10 times cheaper than the next best alternative, that actually gets people to switch their behavior to start using you instead of something else. And of course, being naive is not a competitive advantage. I think, I've kind of thought a lot about whether, even in this setting, do I say, go start your own company now, or go work for a big company for a few years? I realize there's no clear answer, but the most important thing is to know that you have to know exactly what you're doing and getting yourself into before you decide to take such a big step as to go try to be your own boss. All right, so I'm going to stop preaching and actually get into the core here. So I want to talk about, in a very personal anatomy of the first pivot where Adlast Incorporated became URS. As I mentioned, kind of when we started back in February 2013, I was working on the Google Analytics team. Our CTO, Andrew, was working at a company called Shopzilla. Working at a company called Shopzilla, and his kind of whole focus was on building all the machine learning models to actually help figure out if we have $150 million we want to spend and we have 7 million products that we want to sell, how do we best spend that money to sell more of those products in a way that actually is a high enough ROI to make this a worthwhile investment, right? So very core problem, which combined with my perspective and understanding of kind of how you build out these analytics platforms and solutions for developers, can come up with this concept to actually help optimize AdWords campaigns and also enable people to use what they are doing in AdWords to work on Bing. If it sounds kind of weird or confusing, it's because it was, and we realized that after about 4 weeks, it was just a kind of a bad idea, right? The things that we were heard or that people told us to try to be nice, that sounds like a really good $20 million idea, which at first I'm like, shit, $20 million, that sounds pretty good to me. But in startup speak, that's kind of a nice way of saying this isn't a very interesting business. For us internally, we had a really hard time understanding exactly who our customers were, right? Like our initial canonical concept of a customer was like my dad, the small business owner who already advertises on AdWords and wants to do more advertising online, but just doesn't know how to do it. We couldn't find very many other people that were like my dad that were very easy to actually talk to or unlock, which meant we had this very vague concept of who our customers were, right? So I think that was a big red flag, and especially in retrospect, the biggest thing that we should have noticed up front to quickly, even move quicker than we did in those 4 weeks or whatever, to our next idea. And then the third thing, this was actually one of the most important pieces of feedback that we got, was why aren't you guys focused on mobile? If you guys are starting an ads company in 2013, why aren't you thinking about mobile, right? Certainly if you look at the allocation of dollars in digital advertising, the lion's share of the money is still on desktop. But when you look at how the growth rate, all of the growth is coming from mobile. And if you're trying to be a startup, you don't want to go into a huge market that there's already all of these massive competitors. You want to go into a place where you can actually be an early kind of thought leader and actually then be a part of that growth of that industry. So that combined with probably the most harsh feedback that I actually got like twice on the phone when I was pitching people, you just have no idea what you're doing, do you? Right? And like that, someone said, and I kind of laughed, I had a half laugh at first. I was like, huh. And then I actually kind of like thought what the person was actually saying, and they're like, dude, you're responsible for like, not just your job, like 3 other people's jobs at this point. And this is not the best idea and something that I don't think is going to succeed, right? And that one took a while to actually let sit in. But after when I kind of thought about that for a while, talked with our co-founders, and actually then ran through some of these other ideas, kind of realized that we needed to kind of hit back to the drawing boards and kind of come up with our next version of what AdBlast Incorporated was going to be if we wanted it to succeed. So fast forward about a month and a half, and what we kind of then took that feedback into account, and when we kind of looked at the mobile ecosystem in general, what we realized was that so many of the things that people are used to, or these experiences that people love in terms of, how you go from one website to another website, or how, you don't even have to think about like whether you have a website installed, because like you don't install websites, right? We kind of realized that the reason that mobile apps were so broken was because you couldn't actually link into an app, right? Think of how many times you would click on like an email from LinkedIn, and then you click on that email and take you to the LinkedIn mobile website instead of into the LinkedIn mobile app, which you already had installed. Right? Has anyone seen that or felt that before? Yeah, right? So basically the same concept of, wow, like I have more than one place to access information. The app is going to be better than the website because it's native, it's installed, I'm already logged in, it's faster. But yet there's no way to actually take users into that point. Right? So we realized that through Andrew kind of diving into his own background and some of the things that he felt when he was actually traveling and backpacking through Europe. And we had this one conversation where he's like, man, I was booking travel when I was going from Geneva to Paris, and I had to pull out like 5 different travel apps, find the flight that I wanted to take, and then I had to open up like 8 different hotel apps to actually find a hotel in the city that I wanted to go stay in, right? And we kind of realized, wait a minute, why couldn't you just, first of all, find one hotel across all of your apps, and then actually find a hotel that was in the place that you just wanted to travel to? What we realized was the problem was actually 2 or 3 levels lower, which is that you just couldn't make links work for apps. So that's what we decided to go do, is actually put links inside apps. And at this point, again, the things that we kind of felt or heard and the validation that people found is, wow, the world is going mobile, and on mobile, 86% of people's time is spent inside apps. But if you can't actually figure out how to access that information, it's a pretty big competitive disadvantage. But the things we weren't really sure yet, hey, linking is pretty important. It's like the whole way that the web works, but how the hell are we going to make money, right? So that we still had no idea how we were going to make money. But the other things we read, because why isn't this the way that it works today? We got that a lot, right? If this is as important as you guys think it is, why has it taken up until now for this to actually catch on? We had a pretty good answer to that, and what we realized was it all came back to economics, and I'm not, I guess, pun somewhat intended. But then again, we kind of weren't really sure why would anyone ever actually want to do this, right? Like people understood this might be better for users, but they didn't understand why is it worth the 3 hours of engineering time to actually do this? Like, tell me what's going to happen if I do this better. So fast forward to URX today. So we went from becoming AdBlast to becoming URX about June of 2013. And again, today what we actually let people do is get paid to link into other people's apps. So what this looks like is, you're on a lyrics website reading about Bob Dylan lyrics, and you can actually see a call to action to play this song now on Spotify. So you can then click and then open up the Spotify app right to the song that you're listening to. Or you just book, actually, to the point of what Andrew's problem was. We're working with companies like Kayak that we're rolling out with in the next couple months, where you book a flight to a new city, and you can then see all the cool events that are happening from Ticketmaster or SeatGeek, or even restaurants from OpenTable that are in that city that you could go and actually book reservations at or buy tickets to. So again, yeah.
I'm just a little bit confused. What if you don't have the app installed on your phone already?
Yeah. So if you don't have the app, we can take somebody to go install it, or then go to the mobile web if they want to. But yeah, really good question. But again, for us, kind of this line of thought here, right, is from where we are today versus the same foundational concepts of where we started. A lot of it's the same thing, which is how do you optimize and automate marketing campaigns in a way that makes it really easy for the advertisers, is actually really good for users, right? That was the common refrain for every idea that we've talked about in the last 2 years. Although the manifestation of what URX is today is completely different than what it was when we started. So again, for this, part of the way we did that is by talking to users, by taking feedback really well, by not by always playing devil's advocate with their own ideas, but then ultimately by making hard decisions to change direction when we felt that it was the right choice. So kind of with that, I want to talk about what we've kind of identified as about the 4 or 5 common failure cases for startups, and then kind of with that, talk about ways that you can actually prevent them. So case 1. Nobody cares, right? We talked about the concept of startupreneurship, right? But ultimately what this means is that if you don't really know exactly who your target market is, and you don't really have a very interesting value prop for them, you're not going to get somebody to be able to actually start using your software, right? And the way that you do this is if you don't have a 10x better solution than what they are already doing today, even if it is a little bit better, it's not going to get people to completely change their behavior. Because behavior is one of the hardest things to change about humans, right? And to actually get somebody to switch from using X to Y, they have to have a really, really good reason for it, right? So number one thing that I see most companies that I generally not even get off the ground for is because no one really cares. It's that's one of those things. What it feels like is somebody says, oh yeah, that sounds like a really good idea, and when you actually ask them if they would use it, no one says anything. Right? Something, if your closest friends aren't your biggest advocates, or the people that you are first talking to, and you say, wow, I'm building this for college students that are between 18 and 22 that are in Los Angeles and want to do X, Y, or Z, and you actually talk to thousands of those people and they're not interested, that's a pretty big red flag, right? Number 2, founder market fit. So you talk about the concept of product market fit, which is making sure that you have the right product to unlock a new market. But I think a really less talked about but equally important one is founder market fit. So ultimately, why are you or why is your team the right one to be attacking this problem, right? And if you don't have a really good answer to that, or you don't really have a unique, intuitive understanding of a market, or something that you can see that most people don't, you probably aren't the right people to be doing this idea, right? And I think this is a lot of the reason that oftentimes people spin out from working in an industry for a couple of years to then go start their own companies and get a new take on that industry, is because they have a really unique insight into what it takes to succeed, or really a problem that's broken that they can help fix, right? So you think about kind of yourselves as individuals today, and this is just bucketing all of you. Really, if you think about the market that you guys are all part of, it's all, again, people that's your own demographic, your own socioeconomic status, people that are all students, potentially people that live in the same area. So it's you have to be able to understand the right type of product for you to build. It has to be based on really your own core values. So again, if you have any of these kind of insincere ideas, really kind of just make sure that you're not choosing it just because it sounds like a good idea or something that sounds cool, but actually because it's something that you could see yourself working on for the next 5 to 10 years of your life. Case 3, so boiling the ocean. So this one happens a lot. And actually this is something that was almost our failure case, but we fixed. Is again, try to do too many things too fast, right? So a lot of this is when you talk about going into a $1 billion market, or sometimes people say $1 trillion market, or something that's just so big that there's like so many moving parts. It's really, really hard to find that one thing that you just do really, really, really well, and that you build from there, right? Because the biggest challenge is not that you're not a smart team, or that you're not building something that people want, but if you have like 10 different types of customers and each of them want 3 different features, that means that there's like 30 different things that you have to build in order to actually make your customers happy with your product. So instead, you should just build one thing that works really well for a really small segment of the market, and then kind of continue to expand from there as you build out your own prominence in that market. And again, what this feels like, and I can talk about this from experience, and definitely talk about this in Q&A if you care more, is again, there's so many things but just so little time. And it's also really hard to explain what you do, right? Like if you can't tell somebody else what URX does or what your startup does in like 2 sentences, 1 sentence, it's probably too complicated, right? And I think part of that is learning how to articulate your own idea, but also making sure that it's focused enough that you can just be an app that you use to book a ride to wherever you want to go. Right? Case 4. So this is like, there's like many facets to this, but it's just something that's worth calling out, and kind of comes tongue-in-cheek with the one that comes after this. But giving up, right? Like, let's be real, like this is as I said earlier, in like that polarizing, nice little magnet thing I showed, this is a really, really, really hard gamut, right? It's not something that works 9 to 5, or it's not Monday to Friday. It doesn't take breaks or weekends or vacations. It's all the time, right? And I think ultimately the common reasons that I've seen so many of them, even my smartest peers, decided to just kind of give up or stop, wasn't because they weren't gritty enough, or it was that they didn't find traction enough to validate the time relative to the opportunity cost of what they're doing, right? And this is super, super real. And I think what it feels like, and there's been times of every startup will talk about this, it just feels like being underwater, right? And it feels like it doesn't matter how much work you do on any day, if you work from, don't sleep for weeks at a time, which I don't recommend, but that you just can't get above water. You can't find that one thing that customers want, and that the only thing that you want to do is just kind of like run away, right? And that's completely okay, but it's also, especially if everything else isn't going in the right direction, it's something that happens a lot, right? And with this is like if you ask an investor the #1 reason startups fail, they say it's because they run out of money, right? Which is kind of, it's important to talk about, and again, I'm happy to talk about this in Q&A. But again, ultimately, it's not that fundraising in itself is intrinsically difficult. It's that you have to have progressed enough to be able to convince investors and customers to be able to actually use your software, to be able to either get them paying for it so you don't have to raise funding, or to actually be able to have it be something that seems like it's going to grow fast enough to be able to actually get investors interested. And again, part of what that feels like is that when you get to a point where you're arguing with your co-founders about whether you get the 2-liter of Diet Coke or whether you get a 6-pack of Diet Coke based on the difference of the $5 that it will cost you over the next month, that's when you can tell it's you're thinking about the wrong things, right? Because really for startups, like the biggest misconception between people who have done it and have raised money versus those who haven't is you think that when you raise money it's done, you're good, the hard work is over. In fact, it's just the other way around, where all the money does is enable you to do the things that are actually the hardest, which is finding product market fit, proving value to users, and actually scaling something into a really meaningful business. Okay, we'll stop here for a second. Does anyone have any questions on any of these kind of failure cases or anything on that note? Yeah.
How do you keep yourself motivated? I mean, because at the end, you're never sure whether you're going to succeed.
Yeah, I think the way, so the question is, how do you keep yourself motivated if you're not completely sure even if you're going to succeed or not? I think at the beginning, honestly, it's a lot of blind faith, right? You have to, the reason that you kind of leave whatever else you're doing to start a company is because you have enough conviction that this is something that just has to exist in the world, that there's just nothing else that you could possibly do. Right? And I think over time, I think that the reasons change. So maybe the reason that you start the company and see it through for the first 6 months or 9 months is because you're just so compelled by the idea that you have to do it. But then over time, when you're looking at going from 9 months to 18 months to 2 years to 5 years, if you're not seeing that traction, ultimately that same return that you would need to prove that you're not the only one that thinks this is a good idea, then that's oftentimes when people feel, start to even think about other options.
One of the things that comes up in a lot of our talks in this class is the idea of being your own boss, and it was in this before. And a lot of people say that that's what a lot of people go into entrepreneurship because of that, but then they find out that their funding rounds and stuff, they feel like they're working for someone else. So do you feel like you're your own boss, or do you feel like Y Combinator and Google that?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So question, am I my own boss or am my investors my own boss, right? So the most important thing I learned about fundraising from early on from the right people is there's 2 points of negotiation you have when you're raising funding, economics and control, right? So economics, how much money do you invest at what terms? Control, who's on your board, right? So fortunately today we have 3 board members, 2 of them are UX founders. So it doesn't matter how much somebody else can say this is what you have to do. There's not any contractual reason that anyone can say the right direction other than me. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that I completely neglect that person's point of view, because ultimately the only reason that they're there is because I think that they know a lot more about certain things than I do. But that, ultimately, I think in a lot of ways, my customers are my boss, right? Because if we're not doing the things that they want, then we're not going to be here in a year or 2 years.
So it's like a little bit personal, but can you describe like what a typical day looks like for you, just like as a co-founder?
Yeah, so I think it varies. Let me think of the best. Let me think of like the right canonical example to share with that. I mean, for me, it's like okay, I'll wake up 6:37, try to go for a quick workout in the morning, just to get the blood going. Be in the office 8:30. Try to be home, meetings until 6:30 or 7. Go home, try to eat dinner, and then actually do my work until midnight to sometimes 3 in the morning, and then repeat, right? For me, part of the challenge of now going from getting to 25 people and now going from 25 to 50, potentially 100 people in the next 6 to 18 months is actually me having to scale myself out of my own job, which means a lot of the things that I'm doing today, I have to be hiring other people to do instead of me, right? So a lot of what that means today is building out a sales team, hiring VPs for engineering, VPs for sales, bringing the right types of marketing people to help support what we're doing, and really making sure that, again, every single day our customers win. So I think, again, I think if from a time perspective, I don't, it's weird if I don't work 12 hours a day. I think that's like on the low end. But I think more than that, it's like the biggest thing I have to figure out for myself, and I've had a lot of like introspection about this, is how do I make sure that I do enough of what I have to do for myself or spend time with my girlfriend to actually, be a full human being instead of just doing one thing really, really well, right? Because that's the hard part, right? Especially when you see things going the right direction, things are scaling, things are going fast. The hard part is not how do you do that thing better, is how do you just like be a complete holistic person. Yeah.
So you talked about when you pitching your idea, how to like venture capitalists, you needed to have the right proof to ensure then that your project's going to be successful. What does that proof look like when you don't have money or don't have the resources yet to create what you need to do, or do you just have to get that point somehow?
Yeah, so I think, it's a good question. So it's kind of like chicken and the egg. How do you get started and raise enough money to get started? If you don't have traction, how do you get traction if you don't have money? I think a lot of that is moonlighting, right? So for us, we were able to get our first $10,000 investment while we were still all working at our other jobs. So part of that was we built a proof of concept. We had it working end to end. We could show and point to the types of people we wanted to be our customers. But ultimately, $10,000 was enough, not enough for us to last for very long. But it was enough for us to even have like a North Star of like, okay, this might be the right idea. Ultimately, it didn't end up being the right idea, and certainly that investor was very happy that they, that we pivoted, because now they've already gotten like a 30x return on their investment. But like, nonetheless, it's still like, okay, I'd say do everything you can before you have to actually not take a paycheck. Well, and I think that's part of why classes like this, or even being a student, are great, because you have very little opportunity. Okay. I'll take 2 more and then go through, and then we can see the rest of it.
I was just going to ask what type of size of the market that you guys are in, and kind of what's like your long-term goal.
Yeah. So we're in, basically, we position ourselves as being in the kind of mobile advertising market, which will be $130 billion in 2017. Part of that is, again, looking at how trends are moving from people buying things on desktop devices to buying more and more things on mobile, but not just like buying a car, you're not taking the car that you would have bought on desktop and buying on mobile, but there's all these new things that you're buying in addition, such as like Ubers or booking Airbnbs, Hotel Tonight, Instacarts, DoorDash, etc. And for us, we see ourselves as actually being the kind of like connective tissue that helps connect every single app or every single website together on mobile. So I think for us, our approach to this is actually we've built a search engine behind all of this, where we're actually crawling apps, indexing apps, built an API so that any developer can use URX to link into any other app, and actually then have the economic incentive model on top of that, where if you are a local travel company and you show somebody an Airbnb in Dallas when they're reading about Dallas, and they actually go click and buy that hotel, then we let that other developer get paid for it, right? So one more and then,
How do you come up with the name URL?
yeah, for sure. So again, we talked a lot about linking, right? So I think a URL is like a uniform resource locator. That's like, the reason that you go to www.airbnb.com/room1234, it takes you to that right place. We think of URX as being the next generation of the URL that works on every single screen, every single device that you might have. Okay? So hold the questions. I'm going to run through this, and then we can come back to them at the end if that's good. Okay, so kind of bring this back to how to actually validate your idea in the market. Just going to kind of run through, there's like 3 sections to this. Just kind of run through this, and then we can again talk about it a little bit later. I think first is to your point, Danny, is like think really strategically about your market. So we went into a heavily complex market with a lot of players, but we wouldn't have been able to do that if we didn't understand all the dynamics of how things worked before UX and how we thought they would have to work after UX. Along with that, we have to understand what is Google, Facebook, Twitter, Yahoo, Microsoft doing? How do they think about this space? What are they going to be doing now? How will that change over the next 5 years? To make sure that we're not positioning ourselves in somebody's bullseye so that something that was a really good idea for 6 months would stop being a good idea from months 6 to 12, right? So I think thinking strategically about your market is being able to understand even beyond your own startup's perspective of like what you're doing, how does what you're doing fit into the wider macroeconomic trends? Second is kind of build a market hypothesis. And this kind of comes back to the same piece that we just talked about. So we have a very clear hypothesis about our market, which is that the reason that people aren't buying as many things on mobile devices is the same reason that ads convert really poorly or that don't pay out very much on mobile, which is that they're just not very relevant, right? So our hypothesis is that if we can bring relevancy into the mobile experience, so that you actually just see things that you want to see and can actually make ads be information, not annoying, then actually that's a way of completely changing the entire economics or the way that this ecosystem is developed, right? So we had to have that thesis in order to really approach our market. But in order to do that, we had to have a really strong opinion and understanding about what the space that we're playing in is. Third is play devil's advocate, right? So I think it's really easy to fall in love with your own idea. And it's really, really hard a lot of the time to know the 3 or 4 things why that might be a bad idea. So if you don't like play devil's advocate and always keep yourself in check, you're kind of just like not doing yourself a service. So I'm not saying that you dwell on those things, but you should always know what those 4 things are, especially because if you don't know them, and that's one of the first 5 questions that you'll be asked by any confident investor, and it will be very obvious that you don't fully know what you're going after. This one is kind of interesting, but pretend that you're ready, right? So I think the scariest moment of my entire professional career was getting in front of my first customer that I really, really wanted and try to actually convince them or sell them what we were doing. It was like I had to have 3 hours of prep, so many block walks and emotional therapy sessions with my co-founders to really just get up to the point where I felt confident actually selling URX. And of course the meeting went really well, but the only reason it did is because we could really position ourselves not as this 4-person startup that is literally working out of a basement, but actually is this opportunity for what the future holds and why our thesis about the market is the right way forward, right? So we are able to kind of I was able to be the vessel for this big opportunity and not just for a group of 4 people who's been working on something for 90 days, right? So I think kind of always kind of like broadcasting past where you are is a really important way to think like a founder, right? And this one is kind of obvious but important to say. You gotta be able to work your tail off, right? This is not easy, and everyone knows that already. But it's just something to I want to keep driving home, because if you're looking for the easy way that will make you a lot of money, you probably should not do a startup. learn the code, right? So I think this one kind of comes with the next one of make money. But the more self-sufficient that you can be as an individual, but also as like a company, the better off that you'll be, right? And even for me, I decided, I started learning how to code like kind of towards the end of my time at UCLA. And for me, basically all that did was actually it enabled me to understand like, is something a good or a bad idea, or how hard is something to actually build, right? Today we have one of the most talented teams that you can put together. So I don't have to be writing code every day, but we have a common language where I can understand what it means when we have to build a streaming queue to be able to handle terabytes of data that go from this place to this place in this scale, right? Like you even be able to understand what like is being talked about or what is required to be able to build something. First of all, it really instills trust from the rest of your team. It also helps you prototype things faster, not have to like find other co-founders to fill your own weaknesses or have to contract work out with third parties in order to actually get something done. I think this last one, this comes with kind of how hard this is find a peer group, right? So whether it be through on-campus organizations, whether it be through professional organizations, things like Startup Beach that are happening, so a lot of stuff going on in Silicon Valley. If you can find a group of people that are similar in their pursuits and are also going after something that is probably not the most rational thing, which is starting a company, and that has a high likelihood of failure, the best thing for me was finding like my peers and my friends of other people that are going through that same thing. Because oftentimes it's a very lonely island to be like a startup CEO, because you have to front so hard to so many people that like if you can find other people that you don't have to front with, it makes the job a lot easier. But again, the last one, and this is certainly last but not least, is focus on the user, right? When all else fails, think about why what you're doing will change somebody else's life, right? Because if you're not your own target user, you need to make sure that you understand why the person that you're trying to sell to will want to use you instead of using one of the other 10 things that they may or may not already use. So talking about market feedback, and I think this comes to some of what you guys are working on today. If you're not talking about your idea 100 times a day, you're doing something wrong. I'm going to say that again because this is like really important. If you're not talking about your idea 100 times a day, you're doing something wrong. Because not only is it that talking about it 100 times means that you're getting 100 different touch points or like annoying 10 people a lot, but it means that you're actually you're learning how to synthesize like your communications around what your opportunity is, what you're doing, what your value prop is, all of these really important things that only come with experience. So talk about your product. I guarantee you that everybody in this room would benefit from talking about your startup idea way more than you do today. The second piece, and this is a little bit more nuanced, and I'm happy to get into this in Q&A because we spent a dramatic amount of time figuring out how to do this the right way. But test variants in parallel that have the same base. So it's this concept of like the nearest neighbor ideas, right? So it's like there might be 3 or 4 very closely adjacent ideas that have the same kind of like technical requirements of what you'd actually have to build. They might even serve the same customer, but might have completely different value props, right? So you might actually have the same product that you're building, but that's used different ways. So one of the ways you can actually find traction fast is by actually testing a couple of those different variants in parallel to see, hey, like, we don't really know whether we're going to take people who don't have the app to the App Store or whether we're going to take them to the mobile web. We could do both, but we don't know yet. Or hey, are we going to charge people for this based on like a click basis? Or are we going to charge people for this on a monthly fee? Right? There's all these questions that we didn't really fully know the answer to. So we just go like front that we were doing whatever that one was to a different group of people, and then A/B test the results against that and be like, oh, well, I guess we should charge on CPC, and I guess that we should take people to the mobile web, right? And then it's very easy to then go back to those other people in that other bucket and kind of like update them on the exciting new news about your company and tell them you're doing the other thing, right? The next one is don't get defensive, right? And I think we talked about earlier those like blank stares and like empty smiles that people will give you when they just think your idea sucks. It's like you want to make people feel comfortable telling you that your idea sucks, because frankly it probably does in certain degrees, right? Like I know ours did, and parts of it still do. And it's a lifelong pursuit to make your idea and your product not suck. And the only way to like actually hear that feedback is to actually be able to let people believe you, right? And I think the last one, and this kind of comes back to the talking to people 100 times a day, is there's a difference between like going on blast and talking about something and just like broadcasting versus actually listening, right? And I think that the more that you can actually listen to your customers and just like ask them, hey, we believe that, you know, we want to be able to economically incentivize people to link into other apps. What do you guys think about that, right? And just like have the other person talk over 75% of the time. What you'll learn from those types of conversations will be all of the fruits of what you'll go end up building in the next 6 to 12 months. The last one, kind of diving in on these customer interviews a little bit. In person, always, 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 right? I mean, there's surveys work sometimes, but you can't read between the lines. You know, you can always bias the results by putting a survey together the wrong way. You know, talk to people in person so you can actually understand the context behind what they're saying and really dive in when you hear something that you think is interesting. I think, and to that same point, learn to ask past the yes or the no, right? I think, especially when you have that founder energy, this is feedback I've gotten, is that I get people really excited about what we're doing and they think that it's really cool and they want to use it and they want to do everything that I told them they want to do. But like they're so focused on wanting to be agreeable or wanting to agree with me or wanting to think that they're going to be part of this feature that they don't actually get into details of like what's required to actually start, right? So if you don't actually ask past the yes or ask past the no, you're not going to understand like, does this person actually think this is a good idea? Or ultimately, are they going to pay us to do it, right? And so ask like 3 or 4 qualifying questions. Even if you don't know what they are, like try and figure them out, and then you can standardize those over time. Then the fourth one, I think this is the third one, excuse me, and this is actually to your guys' point about how do you like the chicken and the egg, how do you get started? For the first 2 months, we hadn't even built our product yet. We knew exactly what it was going to be. We did our customer interviews. We knew where we were going to fit into the market, but we couldn't actually deliver on value. So what we could do is actually get people sign letters of intent, which is basically like a very loosely defined legal document that doesn't actually mean anything, to be honest. But it says, hey, I am down to use your software. Like, I am willing to pay for this. You know, here's how much I'm willing to pay. And when you have that, if you could rack those up enough, and it lets you actually build a different level of seriousness with the customer, that instead of saying, hey, is this something you want to pay for? They'd be like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Come back to me in 3 months when you're ready. You'd be like, no, sign this now. Let's like read the spec, and I want to build to get this ready for you as soon as it's 2 months, 3 months, right? So I think getting somebody to sign an LOI, if you're a B2B company, or if you're a B2C company, get somebody to actually give you their credit card information way before you actually have your product built. Don't put that in like a simple text field, ask somebody to email it to you or Facebook it to you. Do it the right way. But if you can get somebody to actually like tell you that they're willing to pay for something by actually like putting their money where their mouth is, that's the best way to know that you're actually going on the right direction. And again, we talked about this with talking about your product 100 times, but like you could be building the same thing and talk about it 1,000 different ways to 100 different segments of your customer base. So until you actually like really focus on your messaging and just define it, codify it, repeat it, go talk to 100 people, change it 3 more times, and do that same process over and over and over again, you're never actually going to learn. Not going to learn how do you say the right words to get people excited? Because ultimately, even for us, as of Sunday, we're 2 years old, right? Which is crazy in its own right. But even for a 2-year-old company, we're really only now starting to understand like what is the right way to explain what we're doing, so that today's market understands. So again, messaging can't be underemphasized. Product market fit. Product market fit. This one I just got to sit here for a second because this is something that we've found product market fit 3 times now, and 2 of the times decided to change the idea because it wasn't the right product for the right market, right? But this is where kind of like the next phase of a company starts, of like the company that doesn't quite know where it is or where it's going, that has the right people in the right room building something cool, to actually being something that has a chance to grow. So kind of what that feels like, first and foremost, is its growth, right? It means that you're tracking metrics, you're understanding day over day, week over week, month over month. How is whatever your key performance metric is, how is that growing, right? Is that tracking up or down over, is there seasonality going on? Who are the customer bases that are growing, right? And that's kind of your new North Star. This growth becomes your North Star when you find product market fit. But also, you're not really asking like what if or like how, but it's how do we, right? For me, the conversations internally have changed from like, what if we were able to let people pay by conversion rate instead of pay by install, or pay by clicks instead of by driving a purchase, right? So there are all these like hypothetical questions that now we're talking about, okay, we just talked to Ticketmaster, they want to go live with us in 2 weeks. How do we actually get it so that we can index their content in time to build a right? So it becomes a much more reactive thing where you're actually taking things you hear from the market to figure out how you do them, not figuring out what you're trying to do in the first place. But also, it's kind of weird, but you don't, when you find it product market fit, you don't have to ask if you have product market fit. You just kind of know, right? I don't really, it's a very vague thing that I wish I had a better way of explaining. But when you have product market fit, you just kind of know it because everything else changes, right? And I think with that same point, people actually come to start finding you to do whatever that one thing is that you're good at. So organic growth actually enters the equation when you found that right product that your market really needs. And that's something that is really not there, frankly, before that. You have to will your customers into existence. You have to like convince them to actually want to work with you. But the kind of equation completely flips when they're like, oh crap, 5 of my biggest competitors are using this. Why are we not doing it yet? Right? And I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's a completely new set of problems. It's not, there's not a less work that happens after this. It just means that there's a whole new set of opportunities, responsibilities, and problems that you have to work with. But I'll say, having gone through this process in the last 3 months, it's a lot of fun, right? It's like it's very refreshing to be able to actually, understand who your segment is and every day get new people signed up and getting the money coming through the door is one of the most fulfilling things as a business owner because it means that you're actually creating value. So a couple of resources and then open it up for Q&A. So like any person that's like serious about actually wanting to start a company should buy these 3 books right away and print out every one of these essays immediately. So Founders at Work, this is absolutely my favorite book. It's basically it's like startup stories. So it's written from a Q&A perspective, interviews with the founders of like 30 or 40 companies that you've heard of from like the 90s and early 2000s. And it's basically one of the most inspiring things ever because you realize how lost and how confused every single one of these companies are, whether it's the Yahoos, the Googles, Exites, Lycos, any of the other companies that were like foundational pieces of the internet. No one really knew what they were doing before they actually like did it, right? So I think that was really humbling. I made it, I think, about halfway through this book before I actually said, you know what, I know enough or I don't know enough to go do this. So Founders at Work, I highly recommend. 2 other ones that are more recent books from, luminaries and Ben Horowitz, who UCLA grad as well, Andreessen Horowitz partner. It's called Hard Things About Hard Things. I think it's the most like true and real account of what it actually is like to start your own company. So again, highly recommend it. Super easy read. And with that, 0 to 1. So Peter Thiel, I think you guys probably know who that is. Same thing. Very concise, well-written book that kind of explains his thesis around the companies that are actually like game-changing are the ones that introduce a new technology to market or go 0 to 1, not the ones that go 1 to 10, which is scaling that new opportunity across other markets. Right? So I think being a 0 to 1 startup in Peter Thiel size is the place to get the most value. So Paul Graham's essay. So PG is the kind of founder of Y Combinator, and he is a professor in the truest spirit of the word. He's building Y Combinator to be like a university. He wants it to be like a startup college, right? And part of what his essays are the curriculum for that college. So highly, highly recommend everybody go check out paulgraham.com and actually read these essays, as well as go to YouTube and kind of watch all of these startup school videos or Sam Altman's lectures at Stanford, because those are also very, very reputable people talking about all of the phases of building a company in much more detail than even we've been able to do today. And of course, the last one, and this is kind of comes back to kind of building your own hypothesis about a market, is like you have to understand the ecosystem that's being built around you to know how to even develop your own opinion about it, right? So start to understand or find trends that you're interested in, whether it be mobile, social, local, commerce, like Airbnb for cats, whatever. Just like we'll learn everything that there is to know about that domain space, so that you can then build a more informed understanding of what you should be building to capture that new market. All right, thank you guys. Really appreciate the time. It's been a pleasure, but I want to open this up for questions and take our remaining time to answer anything you guys might have for Q&A for me.
How do you get your first group of customers?
Yeah. Question: how you get your first group of customers? So we talked about that pounding through brick walls. That's exactly right. So for us, we had built a list of about the 20 to 30 companies that we wanted to work with first. Found a way to talk to the buyer. We knew who the buyer was in those companies, so we knew that we needed to be talking to the mobile marketing manager at those 30 companies. Figure out a way of getting a hold of them, from anything from tracking them down at conferences to cold emails to introductions to maybe coincidentally showing up in front of their office at the right time, and just like getting in front of them enough to get them excited. We actually, I think my favorite deal that I've ever closed. We met this. We were in the JFK airport coming back from a conference, and the COO of Rdio opened his laptop, and we saw the Rdio sticker blink on his Mac icon. Rdio was like one of our top 5 customers we wanted to close. We just went out to him and started the conversation, right? So I think customers come from everywhere, but you just need to know, you need to get really specific with who you're looking for, and then just figure out every way of unlocking that segment.
How do you know when you're ready to expand? Do you have a certain criteria?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the question is, how do you know when you're ready to expand? So coming back to the accounting background, right? Just in concept, there's fixed costs and then there's variable costs, right? So if you're building a technology-focused company, building a technology team is a fixed cost, right? You have to build a world-class engineering team in order to at least do the type of problem we're solving. So that's the type of thing where we're always actively hiring very seasoned, very experienced engineers. The variable costs come in when you think about sales, marketing, and operational support, which is ultimately growing your book of business, maintaining your book of business, or evangelizing your company to new potential opportunities. So we think about those as variable costs that are based on different milestones of the company. So today, for example, we have 2 business development people and 1 kind of customer support person. We'll be growing that to 12 or 15 sales and customer support people over the next 6 to 12 months. But all of those are based on different milestones that we'll hit within the company. So when we get to X revenue per day, we'll be ready to hire this many more. Or when we get to XX revenue per day, we'll be ready to bring in a VP to actually go build out this team. So I think a lot of how you think about it is you want to stay as scrappy as possible, especially in the beginning, to prove as much as you can within your own team. And then ultimately continue to bring people on that have adjacent skill sets that will help fill the gaps in what your team has. Part of for our founding team, the way we thought about that is going through what we call founder mitosis, which is basically literally what it sounds. So we have, for every founder of the team, we had a good team because we all do different things. But then we said, okay, we're all overloaded, we're growing, we need to figure out how to expand. So we all then went out and found one person that could take half of our brains, and we could just offload that to them, right? And then that was going from 4 to 8 people in concept was then that first big scaling point. And then from 8 to 15 was its own set of challenges, 15 to 25, 25 to 50. Right?
So kind of just explaining what you said. So what complications have you faced starting a company for you guys?
Yeah, so I think, the question, what complications do we face starting with 3 of my friends?
Yeah.
So the first hardest conversation you have is how you split up the company. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, from, people are investing some of their own money to different skills or different perspectives, or people are able to start at different times. But the only best practice is to do that as soon as possible, and generally you should split it evenly. It's kind of how that conversation works. I have not had to fire any of our co-founders, but I have had to fire people that were my friends, and that sucks. There's no really other way to say it other than it's just one of the worst things you have to do is actually bridge the gap between somebody who's a good friend and somebody who's a coworker. And unfortunately, those have different contracts. I've been able to stay friends with some of those people, but it took some time.
How do you know you've hired someone that's a right fit for your team?
Yeah. So the question, how do you know that you've hired somebody that's the right fit for your team? So I think for us, part of that is, there's 2 buckets of criteria for hiring somebody. So the first is the functional fit. So is this person the right person to accomplish whatever job it is that you're hiring them for? And the second is culturally, are they the right person for this team? So I think for us, it's really interesting in that initial 4-person team, we didn't have to define who URX was or what our culture was. It kind of defined itself, right? It's a part of all of us. And ultimately, as we started to hire people, what we did was then kind of codify those into our guiding tenets. So actually, if you go to our website, so it's urx.com/team, you can actually see what those are, right? So we've very clearly define, here's who URX is. We are a community of peers. You have to leave your ego at the door. You know, we are greater than the sum of our parts, right? And then you have to be able to engage in a debate and lose, right? We kind of knew that if you can't do those things, you probably won't be a good part of our team. And ultimately now we then just like front load that in our hiring process to make sure that while we're interviewing somebody, we don't just see if they're a good fit, but we also see if they're a good fit for the team.
And you mentioned your parents were also entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what they did.
Yeah. So my dad they've done everything. So I think, you know, my parents would always work together on things. So everything from, you know, creating printed forms for hospitals so that like whenever you go or, you know, have to go to a hospital, they get all the custom forms they need. And then ultimately they got that up to like a 100-person company. And then this thing called the internet happened and like printed forms stopped being that important. Then he, you know, started a skateboarding company. So, you know, had like our own street team and everything called Sold Out, which is pretty cool. He was the largest distributor of baseball cards on the internet, and now currently he like works with brick and mortar stores to help them basically more effectively manage their operating supplies. So he's seen the gamut. Yeah, the back, yeah.
I was just gonna ask, how do you know when you've reached the point when the income is no longer kind of invested into the company and you can start dividing between you and your teammates and stuff? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say I don't know yet. Sorry, the question is how do you know like when you're making enough money that, you know, you basically it's like retained earnings, like whether you're reinvesting that money or retained earnings. But yeah, we're not quite there yet. But I think kind of more intuitively, especially if you're a VC-backed growth company, generally the model is that you should be reinvesting almost all of your profits because like the reason that these types of companies get so much growth or grow so fast is because they're continuing to build for the next like 1 to 5 years. But I think, you know, when you get to a more stable point or you really locked in, know your business, you don't need much more external funding. I think the external funding piece is where then you start to actually think about really splitting out different earnings.
Can you describe some of the pros and cons of having 4 co-founders and how the decision-making process worked in the beginning and how does it work now?
Sure, yeah, that's a good question. So the question is pros and cons of having 4 co-founders. How did decision-making work at the beginning and now? So I think the pros were we complement each other extremely well, right? Like we have, the reason we all worked well together is because we all fit in different parts of the puzzle. So we have, one very fundamental back-end machine learning engineer, one very core like front-end engineer, one incredible designer, and one really good business person, right? And then with all of that, then we were able to kind of divide and conquer, and there's no stepping on each other's toes. So I think we were able to divide the work well. The cons, any overhead that you have in terms of people, there's always some of the management pain that comes with that, right? So the more people that you put into any problem, there's this concept of like the mythical man month that if you guys haven't heard it, you should check it out. But it basically means if it takes like 10 people a year to do something, it doesn't take 20 people 6 months to do it. Right, so I think having to learn how to allocate resources is like a really big challenge. I think in the beginning, it was kind of just clear that Andrew was going to be our CTO, I was going to be our CEO, and it was just kind of obvious based on personality types and what the job actually would entail. I think over time, what we now have to do is build out like a management team. Actually now, promoting some of those the other co-founders into different leadership roles, having people have management coaches to learn how to be good managers. But ultimately, as a core, we still hang out a ton, which is actually still where a lot of kind of the vision or opportunity of UX comes from.
I know you're probably like busy expanding your business, but do you plan on doing anything else other than what you're doing right now, which is linking, and do you plan to keep like the same team?
Sure. So do you mean within the scope of UX, or do you mean like after UX?
Or like after
UX,
or like even during?
Yeah, sure. So so question, UX does every, kind of all-encompassing. Do you ever think about like what comes after, or what do you do in addition, right? So I think absolutely. I think for me it's more of like what do I do outside of UX to kind of like get my own personal enrichment and fulfillment. So for me that's volunteering. I love stuff like this. I'm actually like helping other people in terms of like either evangelizing startups, evangelizing building good products, evangelizing what it is like to actually work at a tech company. So that's always something that's been a core piece of what I've gotten enjoyment out, and I've always worked with Katie a lot on that at UCLA. So I think, and when I think about what comes after UX, I mean, frankly, I want to be in a position where I can kind of build my own platform to have a lot of leverage to enable other people to succeed as well. So whether that looks like investing, whether that looks like teaching, whether that's like working at an incubator, certainly continue to build products. Not quite sure yet.
This is kind of piggybacking off of that, but how much have you been forced to think about an exit strategy, and how does that affect your company operations?
Yeah, sure. So question, how much have you had to force about an exit strategy and how does that kind of affect your own operations? So for us, we're in a very, very highly strategic space where frankly no one has figured out how to monetize on mobile yet. Facebook's only started a little bit, but that's only in the last 6 months. So I think for us, we're strategically building into a great space where, our understanding of kind of like our contracts, so to speak, with investors is, hey, like we're growing inappropriately fast right now. If that ever stops being true, there's a lot of other options out there. But we want to see this one through until until the cows cry home, or whatever that phrase is. I don't really know.
When you design a product with different variants and test the variants based on potential customers, are you just test all of them with the same group of customers, or do you change the customers?
So you said the first piece you said about the
just like when you design a product
Sure.
with different
Yep.
variants to find the best fit for the market.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of like it's all kind of what I'm hearing you say is like, how has your product evolved going from having one specific set of customers to having many sets of customers? Is that kind of, and how does that change like the product that you build? So I think the core stays the same, right? So for us, the core interaction of like what we're building and how it works for whoever uses it stays the same. But then ultimately we've kind of bolted on additional things in order to make it more valuable to different groups of people. So just as an example, our first set of customers were music companies, right? So Spotify's, RDO's, SoundCloud's, etc. And then publishers who had music type content. So lyrics websites, music blogs, music apps, etc. So the kind of the core piece that we had to build was how do you find the right song to show a user based on the keywords that are on a page or the keywords that a user searched for, right? And then so that would work, and then that's kind of how we built to that spec. But then in order now, our second and third markets are, event booking companies like Ticketmaster, StubHub, and like local points of interest, so like OpenTable or Foursquare or Yelp. So for them, it's not just by looking at keywords and making a search based on keyword. It's by also searching on like a geolocation or a city, right? So that's a new feature that we had to build, but it's kind of like in addition to the other thing that we already did.
Will you sell a company?
I'm sorry?
Will you sell a company?
Will I sell a company? Yeah, so that's I'd say the politically correct answer to that question is that there's only two ways that a company gets a liquidation event. One is by going public, and the other is by selling. I absolutely intend on doing one of those two things.
How do you decide between adjusting an idea based on feedback and sticking to what people
Ooh, that's a really good, really hard question. So how do you kind of decide sticking to your idea based on feedback versus kind of changing your idea? I think it's like, I don't know the number, but there's some magic number of like, if you ask 100 people and like 60 of them tell you that it's a really bad idea, you should probably change it. But like, if that number might be somewhere between like 30 and 60. But like, do you see what I'm saying? So like, I think by getting a ton of market feedback and just talking to as many people who are in your target market as possible, if it gets to a point where you're like consistently hearing them say the same 3 or 4 things of why they don't want to use it, it'd probably be a time to look at another idea.
Well, I have to think, this is the
last
last
question.
question, because there's another class coming in.
Cool.
And quickly, I mean.
Yeah, I'll hang out, yeah.
I'll hang out there.
Cool.
Last question.
Is there any direct competitors right now for you guys, and what kind of technology are they having?
Yeah, so question, any direct competitors to us, and what was the last second part?
What kind of technology are they?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing that's kind of crazy is that, so question, are there any direct competitors, and like, what's kind of the technology difference, or what it's actually interesting. So in the last month and a half, there's been one other company that's actually now using, it's like the same verbiage of what we do. But the great thing is, and this is actually something I only learned last week, is that if you actually define the feature set that people have to be measured against, so for example, you say, here's the 10 things that it takes in order to be a really good company that intelligently links into apps. and then that other company only does 2 of those 10. Yeah, so, so I think, yeah, so that's great. Thank you guys a lot. I'll be hanging outside if you guys want to.